I've had some rough times these last couple of years, but recently things have taken a turn for the positive. I've been on a positive trajectory in many aspects of my life, and I really couldn't be more grateful. I consider myself extremely fortunate to have been presented with the opportunities that I have, especially as far as education goes. Because just a few years ago, my life was spiraling out of control. I experienced a 6 month long manic episode with psychosis as part of bipolar disorder. And for those who aren't familiar with what mania exactly is, it's essentially a state of mind where you experience like racing thoughts. You might feel feelings of grandiosity. You might experience delusions or hallucinations. In my case, I experienced all of the above, and it severely hampered my ability to be productive in my life. It severely disrupted my relationships and impeded my ability to progress. It sent me on a downward spiral, as I said. I ended up having to take a multi year break from university and college. I ended up losing my full time job, working at a chamber of commerce. I ended up destroying so many of my relationships, whether it be friends or even family. And it took years to rebuild and recover. And in some aspects, it hasn't been fully rebuilt. And I've kind of come to terms with the fact that my life will never look exactly the same as it once was. And I'm okay with that. I'm making this video today because I want to talk about this concept of how we're always in a rough draft, in a sense. When you think of an essay, there's different periods that you go to in the construction of an essay. There's the rough draft period, right? There's the brainstorm period, which comes even before that. If you're a good writer, you'll brainstorm first. There's the part where we finally get a polished, revised essay that we feel comfortable turning in. But the best writers understand that there's always something that can be improved. And this goes for life as well. There's always some component of our lives that we can improve and work on. And our lives are so distinct, it's hard to really zero in on any particular thing because, I could say, for instance, education, but not all of us are in school at the moment or plan on going to school. I could say work, but not all of us may be working right now for a myriad of different reasons. There's so many different things I could say, but none of them will be applicable to every single person. But there is something that we can improve in every aspect. So, just to give an example, in my life, I'll talk about work and education. There was a multi year period where I didn't work at all in the aftermath of my manic episode because I was so traumatized by everything that had transpired, about everything that I had lost. And in a way, I was grieving the experience. I was grieving what had just happened. And it took time before I got back in the workforce. But slowly but surely, step by step, I built the skills required to get me back into the workforce, whether it be confidence or self esteem, for instance. Eventually, I was able to go back into the workforce. I ended up getting a position working at a retail pharmacy chain. And within just a few months of being in that position, I got promoted, which came with a money raise as well. And then a few months later, I got promoted again to a management position working as a shift lead. So, in a 7 month period, I got a job, got two promotions, and I like to think of this in stages because each stage was a different experience for me. At the beginning stages, when I was first hired, I was still learning. I don't even know where to begin. I had to brainstorm how I want to construct this new part of my life, how I'm going to ring up customers on the register, how I'm going to stock the most effectively, how I'm going to handle inventory, scanning inventory efficiently, all these different things. And I was in a rough draft stage where eventually I had a general idea of how to do things and how to get things completed with a high degree of efficiency. But there was still room for improvement to become more efficient And there was still more things to learn, things that I could step into that I didn't really have experience in at all. For example, when it comes to work, positions of leadership. And that's, when the management position became available, I took it with the understanding that I would have to humble myself really quickly because leadership is an incredibly arduous task. It's a tough role to step into. Not everybody's naturally built for it. I'm not even sure I believe that anyone is naturally built for it. I feel like it's a skill that has to be grown and learned. Talent can certainly be helpful, but it's not the end all be all. And anybody who works hard enough can become a good leader. And I'm not going to rate myself as far as how I was as a leader, but I did look for individual things that I could work on, how to get the most out of my team, how to get the most out of myself. And I was able to allot my time a lot more effectively. I was able to find balance and not stress myself out too much. But eventually, the responsibility did become a little bit cumbersome for me, a little bit overwhelming, to the point where it was at the expense of my own mental health and my own mental well being, which I have to monitor closely because of that manic episode I went through. Stress can be an enormous trigger for mania. And the last thing that I want is to go into mania again. Like, it's just not a desirable state. And so I had to monitor very closely my mental health. And as a result of closely monitoring my mental health, I came to the conclusion that this position of work was no longer the most beneficial place for me to be in. And I had already attained the goals that I had set for myself in having this position, like saving money, accumulating some experience. And so I took the time to step away. And I talk about that in a video of mine, which I released earlier this year, 2025, January, called I Quit My Job Today. And I'm still polishing, right? I'm still trying to construct that essay I felt comfortable to turn in. With the job, I felt comfortable leaving because it served its purpose. And I believe that all of us have a purpose to serve in this world. I believe that there's a grand architect of the universe, that there's a God who has a purpose for every single one of us. And I believe in this particular instance that job had served its purpose and it wasn't beneficial to me anymore. It was now serving as a detriment. And so I took that leap of confidence and I stepped away. And now that brings me to what I'm talking about next, which is education. While I was still working, kind of on a whim, I decided to fill out an application to a local university. I had very little hope of actually going to university for the semester I applied to because there were just so many barriers mentally, financially, and I wasn't confident that I would be able to overcome those barriers, but I kind of just did it anyways. I had energy in a moment, and I said, you know what, I'll fill out an application, see what happens, just to see if I kind of get accepted. And that was important for me. And later on, a few months after leaving my job, I actually got accepted to the university that I applied to. And as you can imagine, I was ecstatic. This was like the best news that I've received in an extraordinarily long time. I've spent years socially isolating. I spent years in a deep depressive episode, fluctuating between moderate and severe depression, which made it very difficult to be stable and consistent in any of the tasks that I had ahead of me. And so having this piece of positive news, I attribute a great deal of the confidence that I have now to that positive news. But it never would have happened were it not for what I did during the brainstorming stage. It was a rough draft. Every draft has, right? Every essay has an intro, body, a conclusion. And I was kind of really at the beginning, right? I was at the intro, if even that. Maybe I was brainstorming. I wasn't even at an intro. I don't even have a thesis statement yet. I was kind of just doing something on a whim. But over time, the admissions committee broke down my application and they analyzed my answers to questions. They analyzed my written statements. They looked at my essay and they eventually came to the conclusion after looking at that body of work and deciding that I would be a good fit for their school. And I'm profoundly grateful that they're taking that chance on me and that they've granted me this opportunity. I've never been so excited to be back in the classroom as I am now. And I think it's going to be a positive experience. The main point I'm trying to emphasize here is that there's always something we can improve, but also each draft that we construct, oftentimes, this isn't always the case, but oftentimes is going to be better than the last draft. When I was in university last, I was a junior. I was in my junior year of university, fall semester, when I started experiencing symptoms of my bipolar disorder. I went into full-blown mania with psychosis. I got hospitalized twice in the span of 6 months, once voluntarily, once involuntarily. And those experiences were traumatizing, and at the time it felt like, in a way, my world was coming to an end because nobody believed the things I said. And once I escaped the mania, thanks to medications and treatment, I had an epiphany moment and realized that a lot of the things that I had said and done were so horrible, and that there wasn't a lot of truth to the delusions that I had exhibited and that I had ardently adhered to during my mania period. But each draft will oftentimes be better than the last one. Now, that draft during my mania, it was a horrendous piece of composition. The delusions I experienced resulted in very poor use of sentence structure and improper grammar, and the composition I had constructed lacked any cohesion because of the delusions that I experienced. And some of my writing just ended up off the page, not grounded in the reality of the piece of paper, the composition in front of me. I was living in a fictional universe, but it was just a draft. And good thing there's erasers out there. Personally, I actually use pens. I cannot stand pencils. I don't like the sound, like the feeling that you get when you write with a pencil. It just like makes me shiver in the same way. I don't know if you people who you ever seen someone use chalk on a chalkboard and just the screech noise makes you like shiver and cringe almost. Well, that's exactly what happens to me writing with a pencil, and so I prefer pen. But for the sake of the analogy, right? Pencils have erasers, and I was able to erase away the poor syntax structure. I was able to erase away the grammatical errors, and I was able to slowly, bit by bit, piece by piece, fix them up so that it was no longer an erroneous piece of work, but it was a logical, cohesive, coherent piece of composition, which now includes me going back to school, being active on my YouTube channel, trying to share a message of positivity as far and wide as I can aspire to do. So I just thought of this analogy and I wanted to share it with you all so that maybe you could apply it in your own lives. I gave the examples of work and education, but this can apply to hobbies, this can apply to monetary issues, issues of love, our relationships. There's really no end in sight as to what this can apply to. The important takeaway, and I'll just say one last time, is that we can always improve some component of our composition. We can always improve some aspect of our life. And each draft will oftentimes, in most cases, be better than the last. And even if not, I think the law of large numbers applies here, which is the more times you do something, the more likely you are to reach the mean. Like if I do 10 simulations of something versus 100 simulations of something, let's say that there's success and failure as the two options. And success is the most likely outcome, But there are some scenarios where in 10 simulations where you'll get more fail simulations than success simulations. So let's say we get 6 failures and 4 successes in 10 simulations. Well, the law of large numbers says that the larger the sample size, the more likely we are to reach the mean, the true average. And I personally believe that with trying and trying, trials and error, never giving up, I believe that success is the higher probability outcome in whatever it is that we're setting out to do, because there's so many small goals we can set for ourselves that are smart goals, attainable goals, reasonable goals, timeliness goals. And so in 100 simulations, it will average out to what the true percentage is, and we'll end up with something looking like, I don't know, if you're really lucky, maybe 70% successes with 30 simulated failures. Maybe it will average out to a coin flip, 50% success, 50% failure. Even in that scenario, you're still advancing and becoming better with your drafts. The more drafts you do, the better you will get. Each failure, when looked at with the right perspective, can bolster your chances of improving and becoming even better. So thank you all for watching. My name is Tyler Adolfo. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you have any questions or if there's anything you want to share as well. I appreciate each and every one of you being here. Love, light, and tranquility to all.